Armed Services Subcommittee on Sea Power convenes this afternoon to receive testimony from prominent naval analysts on achieving the 355-ship Navy. We welcome our four witnesses: Dr. Eric Labbs, Senior Analyst for Naval Forces and Weapons at the Congressional Budget Office; Mr. Ronald O'Rourke, Specialist in Naval Affairs at the Congressional Research Service; Dr. Jerry Hendricks, Senior Fellow and Director of the Defense Strategies and Assessments Program at the Center for a New American Security; and Mr. Brian Clark, Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. Our subcommittee is grateful for these witnesses appearing before us. Their thoughtful analysis will be most helpful as we consider options for increasing the size and enhancing the capability of our Navy. Today's hearing represents another step in this subcommittee's effort to examine the Navy's 355-ship requirement. We have received a classified briefing on the requirement, heard from shipbuilders and suppliers, held a shipbuilding hearing with Navy officials, and received testimony from Reagan administration officials last week. Our actions this year will set a firm foundation for an intelligent and responsible expansion of the fleet in the future. To that end, I would note the Bipartisan Ships Act legislation, which would codify the Navy's requirement for 355 ships as U.S. policy. The full committee has adopted the Ships Act into the FY18 NDAA, and our House counterparts have done the same and gotten it passed by the entire House of Representatives. The Sea Power title also authorizes additional funding for 5 ships above the administration's budget request while maintaining effective cost control measures on existing programs. Each of our witnesses has made important contributions toward analyzing Navy force structure, including the Navy's 355-ship requirement. Dr. Labbs' annual analysis of the Navy's 30-year shipbuilding plan is eagerly anticipated and widely read. His special report this April, which projected costs and timeframes to achieve a 355-ship Navy, is particularly relevant. In this report, he found that 2035 is the earliest date upon which a 355-ship fleet could be achieved. That's 18 years from now. His report estimates that reaching 355 ships would require doubling the historical spending on shipbuilding to about $33 billion per year for a number of years. In comparison, the Navy's budget request included about $20 billion for shipbuilding in FY18. He also found the Navy would need 19,000 more sailors to man these extra ships, $15 billion more for associated aircraft, and also that annual fleet operating costs would increase by 67%, or $38 billion, compared to today's fleet. My understanding is that his analysis did not consider the effects of extending service lives for existing ships or reactivating decommissioned ships. Mr. O'Rourke's government service as a naval analyst began in 1984 during our last naval buildup. His frequent reports on specific shipbuilding programs, as well as broader naval issues, are read closely by this subcommittee, by government and industry leaders, by our allies and partners, and by our competitors. His latest Navy Force Structure report published last month highlights the Navy's proposed mix of ships within the 355-ship requirement. He determined that the Navy would need to add at least 57 ships over the 30-year shipbuilding plan to achieve and maintain a 355-ship fleet. This effort would require a minimum increase of $4.6 billion in the annual shipbuilding budget, unless the service lives of existing ships are extended beyond currently planned figures and or retired ships are reactivated. As a retired Navy captain and highly regarded analyst, Dr. Hendricks is intimately familiar with Navy capability gaps and modernization needs. He has written many compelling reports and articles, including one which I have previously entered into the record entitled How Trump Can Build a 350-Ship Navy, co-authored with Robert C. O'Brien for Politico. In this article, he asserts that a 350-ship fleet could be attained as early as 2024 by increasing the Navy's top-line budget roughly $20 billion, cumulative over the next 8 years. To achieve this timeline, he proposes several out-of-the-box actions, including service life extensions, reactivating decommissioned ships, and building foreign designs in U.S. shipyards. Finally, as a retired Navy commander and top aide to a former Chief of Naval Operations and prominent analyst, Mr. Clark has been assessing and making recommendations on Navy force structure needs for over a decade. As with all the witnesses, his body of work is an excellent resource for this subcommittee. Today, I would like to focus on his congressionally directed future fleet architecture study called Restoring American Sea Power. His study calls for a 382-ship Navy by 2030, a figure which would cost an additional $4 to $5 billion for shipbuilding every year. The study's in-depth analysis of capabilities, platforms, and operating concepts and posture were compelling, and I hope to see many of these recommendations implemented. The subcommittee is interested in the views of these four witnesses on the options and considerations for achieving a 355-ship Navy. Specifically, I hope our witnesses discuss what factors are driving the need for a bigger Navy, the right mix of ships for a future fleet, timelines and costs for achieving the Navy's requirement, innovative options to grow the fleet, including extending service lives and reactivating decommissioned ships, the additional support necessary to generate and maintain the fleet buildup, including personnel, aircraft, weapons, other equipment, and maintenance, and finally, actionable items that this subcommittee should consider to lay a firm foundation for a fleet buildup.